Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us on this special hour of Focus on Liberia. And we felt the need to have this show, to host something like this because of the current situation that's going on. The George Floyd, bless him, that incident with the police, and we want to talk about it. Want to talk about what it means for us um, watching this, the impact that it has had on us from the, I guess you can say, from the emotional side, and with all the right and wrong about protesting, right and wrong about protesting, and to be quite honest with you, just watching the video and so forth makes my stomach turn. But something else has been happening for the first time. What I've noticed or what I've realized is that I've been feeling a type of emotional way, very angry and wanting to go out there and kind of make my voice heard. So I know that I'm not the only one that shared those kind of sentiments. And what I want to do is I want to have a moment for us to kind of come together and just talk about these incidents, what it means really, the impact that it has had on us, and so forth. And so I've invited Professor Larry Davis on this show um, to be with me in this hour and to just share some good insights and some sentiments and really look at this thing about race. There's been a lot of stuff talked about over the news, and we want to just kind of talk about it a little bit more and get some in-depth insight. So, Professor Larry, can you please tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what type of professor you are, and then we'll get right into the discussion.
Okay, well, good afternoon, William, and also thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. Uh, I am Professor Larry Davis, and I'm a doctor of higher education administration. And what I do is I develop leadership curriculum for supervisors, managers, and senior executives for major government sector. And I'm originally from, just to share this with you, with your guests, I'm originally from the state of Richmond. I'm sorry, I'm originally from the city of Richmond, Virginia.
That's it. That was quite short, Larry. So
No, no,
tell me, let's
go
dive
ahead.
in to this. Guys, forgive me, but I know Larry. We've known each other for a while. I would say we haven't met in person, but thanks to technology, we've had
Right,
numerous phone calls and dialogues and
right,
discussions, so forth. So, Professor Larry, let's kind of jump right into this. Before we
sure,
get into the meat, tell me, I remember a few years back, maybe 5 or 6 or even 7 years back,
right,
Professor Henry Gates had an incident with the police at his
yes,
home. And
right,
I remember President Obama looked at it and decided to maybe approach this from a different position, to have just some friends coming around the table, and well, not necessarily friends, but just, hey guys, let's have this conversation around this with some cold beer. So I want to know from your perspective, what are your thoughts about that? What do you think Obama's intent was from having that kind of a dialogue in terms of racial tension?
Well, President Obama, as you well know, was elected. His mantra was hope and change. And when he came into office in 2009, he was very much aware of the issue of race in this country. And so when Professor Gate was coming home from a trip and trying to get into his house, I guess the police officer felt that somehow that he was breaking into a house, and so he was trying to explain to the police officer, this is where I live, but it ended up in a situation where there was, there was a disturbance between Professor Gates and the officer, And President Obama felt the need to invite them both to the White House to resolve this issue. Now, the issue with African Americans in policing, unfortunately, goes back a long way. This goes back to, of course, the institution of slavery in the United States, and how police used to, I guess, attack, if you will, Black bodies. And so this is a long-standing issue, unfortunately, in the United States. And so again, the incident with President Obama engaged the police officer was an attempt to kind of come to some type of agreement of what happened, and to resolve that matter. But this issue unfortunately goes back centuries in this country. And with that said, we as a nation actually have a lot to do, a whole lot to do. And this is why you're seeing protests not only around the United States, but around the world, because, African Americans have had a long history of being marginalized in this country. And one of the ways that they have been marginalized is by the use of police. And so, again, there's a lot of work for us to do as a nation.
We fast forward now to this time. We wake up from a weekend, we get this video, right? I mean, I'm watching this and I'm not believing what I see, and it feels like it's just an accumulation of funneling of all of this anger that's kind of coming out, and we see this guy, and he's being put on the ground, and we have been saying for so long that, okay, we went to Congress, we go to we do marches, we get education, we follow the protocol as far as when you get pulled over. We try to be respectful. We engage in corporations to have some kind of influence over what goes on with the policing. It seems like we've done all of this, and yet, we're being marginalized. We're being looked at as less than life, without compassion. I mean, Jay-Z even said it a few years ago. He said, "Look, it seems like work is being done, policing without compassion." And watching that video, to see someone to the point where they pee on themselves, to the point where you just feel helpless. I think that there's something that needs to be said. So please tell us, what is it that we're missing with policing?
Well, William, let me, what context is very, very important as we look at the development of the United States. And I think that what we need to keep in mind is that America, unfortunately, was in some ways formed or built on the backs of enslaved people. And you have to take into consideration, as I stated before, well, also I want to say this too, culture is very, very difficult to penetrate. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what you have with African Americans is this. You have a population of people that have had to endure some 450 years of being terrorized, 250 years of being enslaved, 100 years of Jim Crow, decades of bad public policy decisions which were disruptive to healthy Black family development, redlining, the new Jim Crow, which is mass incarceration. This comes out of an era or a period when Africans were being bought and sold, and so as a result of this particular historical context, people view African people a certain way, even though we're no longer in chains. In the minds of a lot of people, we are less than, because we have that legacy of being marginalized for so many hundreds of years in the United States. I mean, you can be someone like myself who has an earned PhD, and it could be some white guy over here who doesn't even have a college degree. that person does not have that legacy of being marginalized. And so you can be a Nigerian immigrant, right, who is in America, who is some brilliant person. It really doesn't matter because in the minds of a lot of people, you are less than because partly because due to the legacy of being enslaved. Dr. King was brilliant, but did that matter? It really didn't matter because in the minds of a lot of people, you are still what? A slave. And that's unfortunately problematic. And America, although it is a great country in many respects, it is. But when you really, really peel back the layers and look at what we've done as a nation, we enslaved a people for centuries. And the image that we give to the world is that that we're exceptional, but at the same time we enslaved people. And even after the period of enslavement was over, there was another 100 years of actually separate but equal of Jim Crow. So all of this stuff is a part of what we're witnessing today in 2020. These are unresolved issues which we have failed to correct. And and these things will go on until we come to some type of place where, you know what, we're going to kind of confront what we've done. And I constantly tell people all the time is that African Americans really are the elephant in the room. And what I mean by that is that we were the first test model for this issue of race, which has been unresolved. And so we're still battling with that issue of what to do with African Americans and also now other people of color since they're here. But they've never gotten, or America has never got this problem right with Black Americans first. And so, I mean, that's how I, in some ways, see it. And this is where we are now. We're at a
Well,
crossroads.
your generation, do you feel that you have failed us? Do you feel that you have failed the next generation
Oh
coming
no,
up?
no, 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 no,
And
no,
I
no.
mean, the marches and everything, and now yet we still at the same. It feels like we've
Well,
we've gone in circles.
William, let me just say this to you. When I'm gonna kind of broaden this conversation beyond the scope of just African Americans, and I'll say this. With the transatlantic slave trade, 95% of the Africans were taken to Latin America South. And what can be said if you want to look at this in some comparative terms, you know, is that because of the organizational structure of Black Americans, progress has been made, probably more so, if you will, than other Africans in, let's just say, Mexico, Central America, and South, because African Americans have organized and so, and have changed the system here in America. Believe it or not, the situations for Black people in Brazil, for example, is worse. In Colombia, South America is worse because those particular countries don't have Black institutions. In the United States, what you do have, African Americans have formed institutions such as HBCUs, Black fraternities and sororities and so on and so forth. So when you say, have we failed? I would say no. I think that every generation makes progress. And then the baton is passed to the next generation. And so now I think young people are at a crossroad and they're going to have to kind of determine where do we go from here. And I think older generations like myself, we can actually assist, provide guidance. But I think now younger people are going to have to kind of pick up the torch and decide what they want America to be going forward.
Professor Larry, when you say we've made progress, I'm going to need to poke this just a little bit, okay? And what I say is that progress in terms of the ride where we don't have the dogs coming after us and the water hose, or progress on the fact that there's less and less discrimination and so forth, or that, I mean, what type of progress
Well,
is this?
well, there's
And
less there's
yeah,
less overt. There was less overt discrimination because at one time, I mean, there was someone can call you the N word, in public, and get away with it. Now there are laws on the books which state that you can't do these types of things. Also, one of the changes too, that was made was in the 1960s during the civil rights era with King and so on and so forth. At one period of time, America was, well, actually up until 1970, the overwhelming majority of immigrants coming to the United States were from Europe because of the civil rights laws, you know, which was led primarily by African Americans. Uh, we have a plethora of people from all over the world now. Many people who are from Asian countries, from African countries, from Latin American countries, who have been able to come to the United States. And these people are beneficiaries of the work, which was primarily led by African Americans. And so, in essence, what I'm saying is progress in that sense, where now, like I say, immigration laws have changed, uh, public policy laws and the books have changed. Do we still have a long way to go? Absolutely, we have a very long way to go. And you must keep in mind, William, that that people of African descent were enslaved in this country for centuries. And as I stated before, culture is very difficult to penetrate. We've had a culture of oppression in America, and African Americans took the brunt of that pressure.
Does this come to a certain circle where we see this thing happening? The anger, the frustration, the fact
Right.
that it's, you know what, I've tried all these things. And for someone that works in this position, unless they live under a rock,
Right.
I feel that the situation with Ahmaud Arbery, at least in the mind of police officers, would still be lingering. It was only maybe 10 days or 12 days since that video was released. I mean, since it was released and it gathered like this whole media momentum, right? You
Hmm.
would think that there were 4 police officers
Hmm.
that was holding down George Floyd.
Hmm.
You would assume that one of them at some point in time during those 8, 9, 10 minutes would have at least have a conscientious effort or a sense of compassion or humanity to say, hey, you know what? Hey, you got to get off this man's neck. People were yelling, screaming, you're going to kill this guy. Even he was even pleading. I mean, what is that arouse in terms of if you're African American? What does that arouse in you, the type of energy to feel that you're not being heard, that laws, all these things can just be disregarded?
Hmm. Well, and let me just say this, William. I think that one thing that I do want to add is this. I think that when you look at the protests around the country, uh, you're seeing a diverse group of people, which that is progress. Many of the folks who are protesting, who understand what happened was
Mhm.
wrong, are white, Hispanic, Asian Americans, African Americans, people from the Caribbean, all folks. And you see these types of protests all over the United States. Now, I think for African Americans, especially the older generations, they're not surprised by that. As I said to you earlier, African Americans have lived in an era of terror in this country. And it's really unique in the sense that, on the one hand, our ancestors were responsible for America's primary wealth. We built the country without question. That's exactly what Paul Robeson said. Black Americans are responsible for America's primary wealth. Another person, Dr. Edward Baptist, who happens to be a white professor at Cornell University, wrote this wonderful book called uh, The Half Has Never Been Told: Slavery in the Making of American Capitalism. And he clearly points out the role that Black Americans played in the making of America, whereby it became an economic powerhouse. But I think a part of the issue is this: we have placed in this country profit over people. And again, you have to think of how the country formed. All right. As I stated to you before, we needed a labor class. We went to Africa for a couple of centuries. brought back roughly 450,000 people to build the country, you know. And so we started off problematic. And then in 1863, 65, we says, you know what, you're free to go, right? And when that happened, where are you going? You know, you've held the people captive for 250 years, and now you're saying you're free to be whatever you want to be. And that's problematic. And see, this is what I think America has not come to terms with, because the image that we want to paint is that, okay, opportunity, freedom, these types of things, but that just not, it's just not the truth in terms of who we are. And so what
Cornell
we're,
Cornell West, Cornell West, who's a very Professor Cornell West, who's very educated on these type of issues. Many other African American scholars who are very educated on these issues. This sounds like it's not something new. It's not something that they haven't been speaking about. They haven't been through the channels. They've wined and dined with senators, Congress folks. I mean, through the upper echelons of the American society. These are folks who they can pick up the phone and get on CNN. These are folks who even, I'll even laugh and say they can pick up the phone, make a couple of calls to get on Fox, right? But
Mhm.
it doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't seem to be working when we see something like that. And then it's just like a back to back to back to back. And this isn't a social media, how do you call it? This isn't a social media propaganda, right? Where someone can stream together every 4 years these brutalities and then put it together in one moment. I mean, this is within a matter of you talking about 20, 25 days, the level of brutality and injustices that have been inflicted on us African Americans. It feels like it's coming to a certain peak. These riots. Let's talk about them. What exactly is the sentiment with the riots? Because now the public is, I guess, they're saying, hey, you care about your materials more than us.
Well, William, as I mentioned to you before, you're not only seeing people protesting across America. Someone sent me a link today. I mean, folks are protesting in the UK, across Europe, Canada, really all over the globe, because they're, see, with social media now, you can see, the world can see what's happening. And the world can see that America has not seriously dealt with the issue of race. You know, listen, again, we can send a man to the moon or woman to the moon, right? But yet and still, we have not seriously dealt with the, you know,
What is the
with the,
irony? But what is the irony, right? Because I'm sorry to cut you off there, but isn't that ironic? Yesterday, we sent a what? Yesterday, a private corporation sent a spacecraft uh, to the moon. Oh, sorry, to the International Space Shuttle. Isn't that ironic with what you're saying? Go ahead.
no, it is. But again, I don't think anyone should be surprised by what we see with the death of all these African American men. As I had mentioned to you before, is that you know, that the legacy of you know, of an enslaved people that built the foundation of this country is basically common knowledge. And you know, and how black people have been persecuted for centuries in this country. None of this is surprising to me if you have a clear understanding of not only of U.S. history, but what has happened to Africans across Latin America as well. Now, I know that our focus and our scope is the United States and what's been going on in America. And I think that one of the reasons why it's a big deal is because the US, of course, is the number one economy in the world, right? We have roughly a quarter of the world's GDP. And so all eyes are on the United States. But for example, the killings in Brazil are probably 10 times as worse as it is in the United States. But no one pays attention to Brazil because Brazil is not a world power like America is. And what's even worse in Brazil, as I had mentioned earlier, Afro Brazilians don't have any institutions. I mean, they're not unfortunately, their whole concept of how they view themselves as Black people is somewhat problematic. And what I mean by that, although, I don't want to get off the topic, but I'm going to say this just to make a point. But although they are 55% of the population in Brazil, they have no concept of being, if you will, collectively Black like African Americans do. And so within that particular country, in that context, it's much worse. But again, with all the violence that we're seeing in America, if anyone knows US history, none of this should be a surprise at all.
Right, but for the folks who are here within the environment, for people like me, I mean, I have a kid. For many of my friends, many folks who try to make sense of what's going on. Um, the idea here is that with the tools, the institutions, and everything that we have formed, that we have and is established, yet um, we continue to remain marginalized, stereotyped, and there's extreme prejudice against us. Uh, do you think with this incident, with these riots, do you think that um, there's going to be a change, that the needle is going to be moved a little bit? Or do you think it's going to be, okay, let this thing out and then we go back to, uh, I don't know, the status quo?
I think it's going to be up to the young people in terms of what they want America to become in the 21st century. It really is. I think that the earlier generation of African Americans have laid the foundation through protest, through struggle, through building institutions. But as I stated before, I think now young people are going to have to figure out how and what they want America to be.
But we know where we want America to be, Larry. We want it to be a place of social justice and equality and liberty for all. We have figured that out. We've been saying that for ages. That's what we want. We want to be treated where when we get pulled over, right? We want to feel that, um, serve and protect. That this is not something that's going to escalate to where, folks are getting, going to a memorial service, right? We know exactly what it is we're saying that we want. We want the fair opportunity to education. We want a fair opportunity to employment. We want the good things in life that other folks are enjoying. It is clear. It is. I mean, when you say we have to figure out what it is we want, we know what it is we want. But when we go out there, there's a there's this challenge
Right,
that we feel that we have to break through now. This is
right,
a something that hasn't been broken through yet. I mean, even
right,
from MLK time, this is not
right.
something that is feels like
But
it's not
see,
moving.
but see, William, as I mentioned to you before, like I say, African Americans are the element in the room in the United States. And I say this for a second time is because of the legacy of a people being enslaved. And culture is very, very difficult to penetrate. It does not matter how much education that you have, and all these different types of that is irrelevant. I mean, the fact that people have been viewed as a labor class for centuries, that's very difficult to get out of the minds of a lot of people. I mean, it's let me just say this to you. I, in some ways, I envy, for example, Chinese Americans and people from India. And what I mean by that is for example, I've traveled to Chinatowns all over the world: Singapore, Australia, Canada, San Francisco. There's a there's a cultural continuity amongst those groups of people. That is not the case with Black people because of the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. It put almost a permanent stain on Blackness in the minds of people. It happened, and that's where we are. There are so many talented Black people, right? I mean, the only difference between those folks and let's just say their white counterpart is their skin color. But whites don't have that stigma of race because they don't have the legacy of being a slave in America. And unfortunately, that's what you have with the black population.
Um, Professor Larry, something you brought up, and I think we'll transition to having this discussion, and I think we need to kind of go there, is let's talk about this. So you have now first generations Africans, and then
Mhm.
also now you're starting to have second generation Africans
Sure.
who they were born here.
Sure.
The parents came here in the 60s, 70s.
Mhm.
They were born here now,
Mhm.
and they have come up through the ranks, and or 70s, 80s,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what these kids see is this reflection of this type of society, and it is no more from the African mindset maybe that says, okay, you come here, you keep your nose down, you keep your eyes straight forward, hang out with the right group of friends, you'll be okay. Now you have this group, that society that is kind of coming up, and
Mhm.
now having this mixture. How do you think? What do you think that looks like? Because for the first time, when we look at these with the social media posts and everything, it feels, it looks, it appears there's big solidarity. It seems like there's a big, I don't know what it is, but it's like there's a stand coming about that say that, hey, this can't continue.
Well, no, listen, William, I think that injustice, people can witness what injustice is, right? I mean,
Yes.
I know you're talking about first and second generation African immigrants. And listen, I mean, if you're being marginalized, regardless of who you are, the old saying goes, people want justice for what is right. And so I think I would agree with you, that these first and second generation Africans are seeing that America has some unresolved issues. And now many of them are beginning to see uh, what what some of the problems that America really has. You know what? A lot of Africans that I had met who had not come to the United States, they basically saw America as some type of shining star on the hill with no issues at all. And
Right.
now that people have been born here and they, and first and second generation, they can see what the problems are. And I think that some people felt that, if you will, Black Americans, domestic Black Americans, foundational Black Americans, were making excuses for not achieving. I think for the first time, people are beginning to see, the unresolved issues that we do have in the United States around the issue of race.
Will that be more? Will that create more? Um, will that create a sense of empathy? Will that, in terms of that realization, do you see that because there's still going to be a very close connection to Africa? For example, in Liberia, there were folks in Liberia that went to the embassy, and they
Right, right, right,
they
right,
expressed that, hey, you know what, this is not okay. This is not okay, the way
right, right,
that
right,
type of
right,
treatment.
right,
I mean, do you see
right,
that
right.
happening
And
more and more?
right, and as I mentioned to you before, people had sent me links today from all over the globe where people were protesting, and they knew that this death of this last person, it was really kind of almost the one could perhaps say it was a straw that broke the camel's back. And again, people are outraged by this level of injustice against citizens, against America's own citizens. I mean, William, Black Americans have been in America for over 500 years. We are more American probably than anyone else, with the exception of perhaps the native population. As a matter of fact, Dr. Henry Louis Gates said that circa 1800, circa 1820, 99.7% of the ancestors of African Americans were already living in the United States, which means that Black Americans are an old population. We've been here for a very long time. But even with that long length of time that we've been here, we had to fight injustice because of the concept of race. And again, because we came here involuntarily. Everyone else came here under normal circumstances, right? They came via airplane or by a boat for what? Individual freedom, opportunity to reunite with family, education, these types of things. That's not the story of the Black American population. As I stated to someone earlier today, Black Americans are the most distinct population within the context of the American experience because our experience is like no one else. It's just a completely different experience from the rest of the
Right, and we want to build on
voluntary
that.
immigrant population.
We want to build on that, right? So
Right.
it's good to know, it's good to have, but the identity of who we are as we move forward, right? Um, we want to be um, evolving. We want to be striving.
Right.
We want to
Right. And we
why is it met? Why is it that we're met with so much, things that happened centuries ago? I mean, these police officers that did this brutality, they weren't born back then.
no, but what I'm saying,
So,
but wait,
so
because
is there something that we're missing within the police academy training? Is there something that they're missing, or is this just a? I mean, how can we change that dynamic? Because if not, we feel stuck. If we feel stuck, then this is what's going to happen. There's going to
right.
be lash out. There's going to be riots and so forth.
Mhm. Right. And William, change, unfortunately, change takes time. And I agree with you that there needs to be different training strategies as it relates to police officers.
Yeah.
Police officers need to understand cultural sensitivity, which they don't. Um, you'll find that the vast majority of people, whether they're Americans or wherever they're from, don't have a great, I guess, understanding of history in this country. It's just, I actually lecture all over, and what I'm discovering is that a lot of people have no clue about the history of America at all. And so what you have is a lot of officers who just don't understand. But William, but here's the issue again. And again, please forgive me for being repetitive. We cannot minimize the legacy of oppression, slavery, Jim Crow, the perception of Black people because of slavery, race. All of these things are a factor. And as I stated before, culture is very, very difficult to penetrate. Very difficult. And like I say, and think about this, William, the institution of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, began circa 1441, lasted until the 1860s. I mean, this basically stained the minds of a lot of people. It changed the relationship between the African people and the rest of the world. That slavery was a defining moment for people of African descent.
Right, right. I have someone that says, a Liberian person on this, that says that Constant says it is bad for an officer to kill a black man. It hurts so bad. That's one of the comments. Another
Right.
person says, I can't breathe. And
Yeah.
I mean, these are um, the impact. And I'm just wondering, as we fast forward today, with COVID-19 and everything, is there an outlet for us to maybe express some of the emotions, because it
Yeah,
feels like we're bottling it up.
yeah,
Is there an outlet?
sure, sure,
How do we
sure.
express some of the stuff we're feeling?
Well, definitely peaceful protest, man. And what I mean by, there's a right way to protest, right? And, and that is to be organized, have a clear message, to show of unity, man, and actually bring people together. That's the right approach to in terms of doing it doing it the correct way. The wrong way, the wrong way is actually violence, right? And destruction of property. And these are the types of things that you don't want to do. I understand. Go ahead,
Yeah,
William.
Larry, I mean, it is true, but okay. So Atlanta, we have an African American mayor.
Sure,
In California, one of the biggest, most powerful position is to be a county supervisor.
sure.
We have, I believe, two county supervisors that are African American. We have
Right.
council members who are African Americans and Latinos. We
Hmm.
have a mayor who is just, phenomenal guy who, works hard to ensure some kind of
Hmm.
equality. We have a governor who, he's very. Some people may consider him a little bit too liberal, maybe,
Right.
right? You have the Minneapolis guy who came out, and from the way he was speaking, you maybe feel that this is he feels so strongly about equality. Even the chief of police over there,
Right.
right? He's African
Hmm.
American.
Hmm.
Um, we have individuals in these key positions, roles of authorities, of powers, and so forth. And yet, um, this can happen. We had our president, Barack Obama. He was in a position, I mean, one of the most powerful position in the world.
Yeah. You know
And
what, William? Wait.
so what are
Listen.
you what is it more that we have to do? And I think that the young people, we are cognitively very aware, very attuned to the efforts that have gone into this stuff. And we see it, and we see the body of work, the amount of work that has taken place. And
Mhm.
yet, um, we don't think that is working. I'm sorry, we don't see this thing
Right. No.
working. We see
Right.
it just being a circle, like a hamster on a Ferris wheel. We
Right.
don't see this
And,
thing working.
and William, again, what you have to understand is that uh, 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 what we have a system we have a system which is profit over people. Been that way for a very, very long time. Profit over people, very, very long time. And that culture is not going to change until we decide we want it to change.
Is it
Because
now? Is it now?
that's up
Is
to
it
young people.
now?
That is up.
It's
We,
up
we
to us,
are
the young people.
we are at a crossroad. Seriously, we are at a crossroad, and that could be it. We are, because again, you have not only uh, Black Americans who are out protesting, you have a multiplicity of quote unquote races of people who are saying, hey, this is wrong. Not only in America, but across the globe. They're saying this is absolutely, uh, we can't stand for this. And we have to speak up. And actually, I respect what people are doing, these young people doing, especially the ones who are doing it peacefully and protesting the right way. But I understand the anger too at the same time, because this happens far too often. And William, this is something that I have not said, and I keep pressing this: the issue of slavery and marginalization of Black folks. If you notice, William, America is very multiracial, multicultural in 2020. What you're not seeing is this. You're not seeing the ongoing killing of Asian Americans. You're not seeing the ongoing killing of Native Americans. You're not seeing the ongoing killings of Hispanics. You're not seeing the ongoing killings of white Americans. What you're seeing is the ongoing killing of Black people, primarily African Americans. And this is largely due to the history of America and how Black people are anchored in America.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we talked about this is focused on Liberia, but we had to do something um, just definitely important concerning the death of George Floyd. And then there were also other folks as well that have lost their life for no real reason,
Right.
no apparent reason, and it has been very painful. It's a very dark time, and something you talked about, Larry. I want to get into a little bit
Sure.
because from the there's another side which is with the riot where it says basically that look, sure, I am tearing a few buildings up,
Mhm.
causing a couple of fires,
Mhm.
disrupting businesses for a day or two or three or
Mhm.
for 1 week. But
Right.
I'm not oblivious to the fact that there's insurance. I'm not oblivious to the fact that with everything that's going on, this is probably maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of insurance folks' profit that's going to get hit. What
Mhm.
I'm looking at and what I'm trying to appeal to our insurance company and corporate America and so forth is the idea here that we are intricately linked, that
Mhm.
we're intricately linked. And so corporation of influence
Mhm.
um, knocking on the door and say, hey, we feel that we may not get listened, we're not being listened to.
Right.
But if this is a capitalism society where people respond to money, how will the police or Justice Department respond to a billionaire corporation executive
Mhm.
going and saying that, hey, this stupidity that this police officer did
Mhm.
uh, is bad for our business, is bad for
Mhm.
capitalism, is bad for our shareholders,
Mhm.
and we no longer are going to tolerate this impetuousness of actions,
Right.
this brutality. We're not going to tolerate that. So, do you
Mhm.
think that the folks who are rioting, they're trying to, in some way, shake the tree to get corporations to understand that this impacts them? Because, hey, we do buy at Target,
Sure.
do
Sure.
shop
Yes.
at Nike, we do buy at all these stores, AutoZone, CVS, Walgreens,
Mhm.
and yet they're silent. They're silent on some of these things where they have a lot of
Mhm.
power, they have a lot of influence. What will
Mhm.
it take? And I'm sure African Americans are shareholders in some of these
Oh,
corporations
sure.
too through their
Mhm.
401ks.
Sure. Mhm. Right. 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 And the short answer to your question is yes. Okay. Absolutely.
So I'm
And
so breaking down something is, you know, what is it? I mean, what, 30, 40, $50,000 worth of merchandise to someone torturous eight, the psychological impact that that's going to have on folks compared to a couple of $1 million.
right. Well, all of this protesting, man, really is the voices of the unheard, right? And young people specifically want to ensure that they speak truth to power in terms of what their needs are, right? And and now, as I stated before, I'm not in favor of the destruction of all this government property. And I understood your point. I just don't think that's the right approach to do it. But you know what, William? Let me just share something with you. I think a wonderful book that I'm going to recommend, and although we're talking about the situation which happened with the death of this young man and by the police, I would recommend this book. And this book is primarily, it's really about reparations, but what it does, it paints a very clear picture of how we got into this situation in America with race and discrimination and policing and so on and so forth. The name of the book is From Here to Equality, and it's called Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. It's by Professor Andrea Hurston and William Darity. And what the book does is provides a clear outline to how we got, as I stated to you, to this point in terms of what's been going on in the criminal justice system against blacks, specifically Black Americans, but also other minorities as well. Um, it's extremely problematic.
What is the book called again? Can you say it real slowly for our listeners?
Yes, the book is titled From Here to Equality, and a subtitle, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century.
By who?
It's by Dr. Andrea Kirsten, and that last name is spelled Kirstem,
Okay.
and Dr. William Darity.
How'd you spell the last name? Darity?
Darity is spelled Darity,
Uh-huh.
Darity, Darity.
Okay. Now with everything that's going on, tell me, and I know it's a little bit difficult, but
Sure.
if you can, what are maybe 5 or 6 things that you feel that we have moved the needle on in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years? What do you think are some things you can point to as kind of something that's a substantial progress? Now, one thing I do want to, as I ask you this,
Right.
one thing that does come up is now there's a lot more cases where folks that were falsely accused
Right.
of criminal acts,
Right.
they're being released. They're being released, and I think that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't think that would have happened. And so definitely, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I think he kind of led that battle. He's from New York, an African American guy. Can you imagine? I mean, he went to junior college, and then after that, he rose through the ranks as a DA, and he started looking at some of these cases. And unfortunately, a few years ago, he passed away of cancer. But so that's one thing I think where we've moved the needle a little bit, especially with the whole cannabis stuff. But tell me, are there other areas?
Yeah, let me reference one more book, if that's okay. Yeah, it's called Policing Black Bodies, and it's subtitled Surveil and How to Work for Change. Basically, but just if
now, are you giving that to us or to the police officers? It sounds like that's something every police officer should read.
No. This particular book is actually providing solutions to this problem of the criminal justice system. I think this one of the areas where we've made quite a bit of progress. Believe it or not, I can't under Trump, which is interesting, but we have. There has been progress in this area because, as you well know, William, we are 5% of the population, the United States, and we have a quarter of all people incarcerated, which is extremely problematic. But again, locking people up is money. So, and as I stated before, it's profit over people in this country because we are a capitalist society, and that's one of the ways that we can make money, unfortunately. So.
You've given me one example. I'm not going to let you off the hook. I need more. I need to understand that there's more stuff that we've been making progress. We've had to have been making progress. Tell me, is there more? Are we seeing increase in employment of African Americans in certain positions? I mean, are we what exactly? What are some things that we're doing?
But Williams, you know what? To me, are you familiar with Dr. Claude Anderson?
Dr. Claude Anderson?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, he's someone that I wish that you could get on your show. He is an expert when it comes to African American history. He wrote the book Black Labor, White Wealth, and a plethora of other books, which outlines what we need to do as a nation moving forward. Um, what I will say to you again, the two books that I mentioned to you uh, provides detailed examples of what we need to do moving forward. I think that, listen, yes, there are more African Americans who who are employed, small business owners, these types of things. Not enough. Not a, like I say, we've been
Do
in the
do
country for.
do, do you think
Go ahead.
our do you think that the Indian population, and do you think that the Chinese population, do you think that there's a social consciousness and awareness of um, the challenges that are faced by African Americans? Do you think so?
I think that first and foremost, for example, Chinese or Chinese Americans, they're focused on their own communities. The same with India. That's I think that that's their primary interest. I think on a general human level, sure they're concerned, but I think that they're more concerned with their own communities, which makes sense. But see, William, here's the difference, as I mentioned to you before, between let's just say uh, uh, Asian Americans, specifically Indians and Chinese. Uh, there was never a break in cultural continuity. Indians came to America voluntarily. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why India is a superpower today is because India marketed toward its diasporas. There are millions of Indians living all over the globe. Same with Chinese. There are 60, 70 million Chinese in the diaspora. One of the things that the Chinese did is that they marketed toward their diaspora. Now, with Africa, on the other hand, it's a bit difficult to do. And what I mean by that, and we're just beginning to do it now, is because, like I say, with the transatlantic slave trade, there was a huge break in terms of cultural continuity. Uh, for example, African Americans now are a fundamentally distinct population. They've been in America for 500 years. They basically are as American as apple pie. Are we reconnecting with Africa? Surely. We're engaging uh, the African continent. But I just think that it's much more difficult to do because culturally speaking, we are Americans. And when you look at Africa, it's 54 independent countries, which has a diversity of people which view themselves in terms of their ethnicity first.
Got it, understood. So where do we go? How do we move forward with
I think we're doing that.
how do we move?
I,
How do we what? Look, 2020 depends who you talk to. They say, look, the first 5 months you might as well throw all these months out of here, right? But I think
mhm,
that this time of reflection, being with families,
mhm.
realizing what's most important, and so forth. Um, I think that people are going to come out and they're looking at this and saying, okay, they're going to be looking for some type of leadership or something that they can kind of grasp or
Mhm.
point to, because we're going to suffer this economically too. I mean, just with the COVID-19, meaning. So, do you think that there has to be something
He,
from our government?
Let me just say, in terms of what's going on with us here in America, what you mean, or could you clarify the question? I want to make sure that I give you a solid answer.
Well, yeah, I'm saying how do we approach, what's the right approach for change? What is it we want? How can we make our voice known that, hey, we want to stop to police brutality? We've been saying that every day,
Okay,
every
okay,
second.
okay,
What's the
okay,
approach
okay.
now?
You know what? What I would say, it has to be a collaborative approach, William. And what I mean by that, you need to engage your local politicians, your churches, your institutions. William, listen, this particular situation here, the easy thing about it is that most people clearly understand that this is wrong. What happened to that young man in Minnesota was absolutely wrong. Everyone here is on the same page. Organize, protest, make your voices heard. Hopefully, you do it peacefully. Ask for real change. Be a part of that change. have solutions in order, implement those solutions, and build upon those solutions.
Isn't that our isn't that what we have our politicians to do? Haven't we
Well,
voted in the right folks? Haven't we written
perhaps,
policies? Haven't we
perhaps, perhaps, and perhaps not. And I think that one of the ways that we make progress and we make change, man, is we get out there and do. Even if you don't know what to do, get involved in some way. And as I stated before, we all know what happened with this gentleman in Minnesota. It was just absolutely egregious. And so with that said, it should be a catalyst for change. I mean, William, people are still protesting all over the United States, all over the world for what happened. And uh, so I am optimistic in some ways that at least people are being heard, and some changes will be made. What those
I
changes will be,
I feel that I feel that our America, um, I feel that they carry it around as a badge of honor in a quite of a sickening type of way. I feel that around the world that this injustice, inequality, I feel that it's kind of it's carried around as a badge that somebody would wear and they can have a conversation about and they can intellectualize it and they can feel some type of like I am humbled by the fact that we still have work to do, and I feel that is more just a lip service, and it's not really addressed.
well, not enough.
Um,
Wait, let me interject. Say, not enough white people have done what they needed to do,
yeah,
and I think that how do I say this? I think that I could perhaps say, that even African Americans need to do more. But I think that Black Americans have been in a situation where, again, because they've had a long history of marginalization, they had to kind of create something out of nothing, right? And so, with that said, they've always had to kind of push the envelope because what I mean, they were already at the bottom. They were already at the bottom caste of the United States because I'm going to go back to this again because they were the labor class, kidnapped, brought to America to build it.
definitely, definitely understand. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We have Professor Larry Davis has joined us. Wanted to have um, just a conversation so we can look at this for what it is and have a space for an outlet to express some thoughts, feelings, and emotions with everything going on social media.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage everyone to definitely go out there and speak loud, be angry, but don't do something to hurt someone. Understanding that yes, you are a human being and that you have a pulse and you have a place to be angry uh, about everything that has transpired. And
And
we
William,
hope that
let
you
me
take that
let,
energy. Yeah.
and William, let me interject and say this too. And when you look at all of what's going on, and when you look at the history of America, it really has been African Americans who have actually kind of been in the forefront of change. Even with this movement here, we have always been the elephant in the room for change. Now, as I stated to you earlier, America is multicultural now. Asian American, Hispanic American, Arab American, Native American. Who's leading the pack? African Americans. They've created this. How do I say this? This form for protest, and you generally don't see that in other parts of the world where you have like diasporas. But we have to do this because we know that in order for America to change, we have to push America to change. It's not going to happen otherwise. And I'm going to say something that's very, 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 very kind of controversial here. If you're expecting other groups of people to do it, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're going to have to lead the way. That's always the way it has been. Civil rights, African Americans. And I can go on and on and on in terms of movements. We've had to be the change. And we're still leading the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Larry. Once
very welcome.
again, folks, you're watching Focus on Liberia. I think he just expressed some last departing remarks that be the change that you want to make, and that we have it in us. We have a legacy, we have a history of being change agents, of moving things forward, and of fighting for civil rights and civil liberty. And in this time with COVID-19, and also with the incident, the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Sandra, I believe her name is, we just want to lift up and give a word of encouragement to the families, and also to those who are joining us in this time. We want to say thank you, we appreciate you, and also that be the change that you want to make. It's a very trying time. Find people that you can express yourself and your anger to. Please be safe. And we're not condoning rioting, but we understand that there's a lot of frustration out there. And so just be safe, and thank you once again for joining us. We're signing off.
All right.
Thank you, Professor Larry.
Thank you, William. It's great speaking with you, man.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.